Hey everyone, welcome back to the Soccer Queens podcast where we discuss everything female athlete performance training. I have Emily Neff back on again as promised and also as requested by you guys. You have loved her other episodes, so we're so excited to talk everything menstrual cycle today. And one thing that's been coming up a lot with some of the people who message us and some of the athletes that we've worked with over the years is what goes on with these missed periods, or should people be concerned when they don't have their period for several months? And what are some solutions that we can help our female athletes with? And also, what are some misconceptions about solutions that are being presented to teenage girls? So, Emily, welcome back. I'm ready to go.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited. This is definitely a conversation that is near and dear to my heart and so necessary for us to have.
It really is necessary, and I think the problem is a lot of people just aren't educated on this topic, and it's very new, and it's becoming discussed a lot more, and we're just happy to dive in right away. So, when it comes to missed periods, what causes them? Because a lot of people assume it's the girls who are super skinny and who might have disordered eating or they're over exercising, which, yes, but what are some other causes for irregular periods?
Such a great question. So, when it comes to our menstrual cycle, we have to understand that our body is an integrated system where our sex hormones are affected by more than just someone's desire to get pregnant. In fact, when an athlete goes through puberty, this is when her natural fluctuations of her hormones are going to start kind of figuring themselves out. And that often can take a couple of years. So, for an athlete that maybe is experiencing an irregular menstrual cycle, first, I think it's important to define what is an irregular menstrual cycle. So first we can talk about what primary amenorrhea is. So that's when you're maybe not getting your period until 15 years or later. And that's a sign that something isn't going right. I like to say under the hood, your menstrual cycle is a vital sign for a female athlete. Think of it as like your heartbeat. And if the menstrual cycle doesn't show up before age 15, that's a sign that things aren't going right. We also have secondary amenorrhea. So that's when an athlete already receives her first menses. And from there, her period goes missing. So her period is going to go missing for 3 or more months. And again, we can talk about the causes in a bit, but that's just when the period becomes completely irregular. Next, we also have oligomenorrhea. So that's when your period, think of like an irregular menstrual cycle. That's when your cycles are maybe greater than 35 days apart, or when an athlete has, or any female has less than 12 cycles per year. All three of those categories is what you would describe as a irregular menstrual cycle. Amenorrhea is when your period just goes missing. So you had your onset of period, and then from there it just goes missing, and it can go missing for years. So understanding that, how we define what an irregular menstrual cycle is, now we have to understand what drives our menstrual cycles. So our menstrual cycle is just going to be a result of our hormonal fluctuations. And it's important to understand that these hormonal fluctuations are important because that's what allows your body to release an egg. And that egg needs to be released in order for that egg to be fertilized and for you to become pregnant. Now, let's say you're not trying to become pregnant. That's totally understandable. Most girls that are listening to this podcast are not in that stage of their life. So, why is it a big signal if their period isn't working? Is because having your period is going to be a result of the hormonal cascade of what is known as your HPA axis. So your hypothalamus talks to your pituitary, which then is going to talk to your adrenal glands. So think those are the glands that also tell you that you're super stressed. They release those hormones. What happens is that when an athlete is experiencing a state of high stress, or known as low energy availability, meaning the amount of energy in her system is not enough to meet the demands of just normal body functioning. So think of it this way. You have an athlete, she's eating a certain amount of food, minus how much energy she's expending while playing her sport. Whatever is left over is not enough to one, allow those hormones to go through that cycling as necessary. We don't have enough energy to keep your heart beating. We don't have enough energy to allow your eyes to function. So when that happens, your body is really smart and it goes into survival mode because you don't need to have a menstrual cycle in order to survive. From a body standpoint, if there's not enough energy for you to survive, you don't have enough energy to carry a child. So that's when it starts down regulating systems. So that's when those hormones that are going to, like your luteinizing hormone is going to peak, and that's what's going to tell your ovaries to release an egg. We see that those hormones become blunted. So instead of having a nice, beautiful hormonal circulation, we actually see a flat line. And that flat line is really important because when your menstrual cycle hormones aren't fluctuating the way that they should, other processes are going to be affected, such as your ability to recover from an injury. Every time you play a sport, you lift weights, you're experiencing micro injuries. The only way to recover from those micro injuries and hopefully adapt and become better is to make sure that your body, one, has the building blocks to recover those tissues. Two, it has the energy to kind of put those building blocks to their spot. Now, if we're experiencing that low energy availability, we can't recover from those micro tears. So that's when we're going to see an increase of injuries. And that's not just bone injuries. A lot of times we like to link, irregular menstrual cycles with stress fractures, which are of course a thing. But we also have multiple studies that have now shown that irregular menstrual cycles are linked to musculoskeletal injuries, such as an ACL injury. So again, because our body is such an integrated system, when we have this irregular menstrual cycle, we have to consider this as a warning flag. Hey, red flag here. Your body doesn't have enough energy to just persist in life, let alone recover and excel in your sport. And for our athletes, that's really important because most of our athletes that are high performing, they want to be the best that they can be. And not having a menstrual cycle tells you straight up, you will never realize your potential because you're not providing your body with the fuel and the building blocks that it needs to actually perform.
I am so glad you just talked about the consequences of having missed periods and how it just shuts down the entire body and not just your ability to perform at a high level in your sport, but just everyday life. It just is a disaster for everything, your physical and your mental health. And I want you to just kind of touch on what else can cause it. So you talked about the low energy availability, over exercising. What if a parent says, well, like, my girl seems healthy, like she's managing her load, she hasn't lost a lot of weight, but
Mhm.
are there other lifestyle factors we should be looking at?
So first, I kind of want to speak to, well, my daughter doesn't look like she's malnourished, and that's something that I have heard before, and that stems from what we used to talk about as the female athlete triad. Now, the triad, we have updated this since 2013. We have an updated consensus statement that now is identifying what REDS is, so relative energy deficiency in sport. So that means that our energy availability is low. And this has been updated from the female athlete triad because in the triad, we used to say that body mass index or body fat percentage is going to really help us identify who's at risk. Problem is, with science, we get that new information and new things are constantly changing how we are able to look at things. So now we realize that actually females can have missing menstrual cycles, even if they are by BMI definition overweight. Their body fat percentage can actually be pretty high for this to happen. Your daughter does not need to look malnourished. I like to kind of give this comparison. Now, I am sure that we have many parents or moms out there listening that are like, oh, I've tried that diet and I feel like I'm eating absolutely nothing, but I can't seem to lose weight. And that's where it's like, well, yeah, your body is really smart. You decreased your calories way too fast. So it adapted, and your body is also in survival mode. So right now, your metabolic rate has slowed. Now, your metabolic rate isn't just digestion, it's the sum of all of your chemical reactions in your body. So that means things your body doesn't need to survive have now been down regulated. So that's going to occur with our female athletes. So they have a huge spike in training load, and they're not meeting that with enough fuel and enough recovery, they're going to see a down regulation of these systems, especially the menstrual cycle. So, your daughter absolutely does not need to be extremely thin or extremely malnourished to be someone that is experiencing REDS or an irregular menstrual cycle. So, that's really imperative. Now, when it comes down to what are the other factors? So, at the end of the day, we have to remember our body still is a system where calories in minus calories out equals whatever is left over. So, food intake is probably one of the most imperative concepts that we need to talk about when it comes to menstrual cycle irregularities. So, research shows that females that spend most of their day in a state of catabolism or not eating are at a much higher risk of experiencing this, even if you think that they're eating enough. So, think of it this way: an athlete that's maybe eating 2 or 3 meals a day compared to an athlete that's eating 5 or 6 meals a day. If she's eating only 2 to 3 meals a day, she's fasting for a greater amount of time. That's stressful to the body. That's a catabolic state, meaning her body has to break down to give the fuel that she needs to perform whatever exercise task she's asking for it. So, we see that if females actually increase their meal frequency throughout the day, one, they're going to be able to consume more food because you can only consume so much food in one setting. Your stomach can only expand so far. And if we increase that meal frequency, we're going to decrease the chance of an athlete experiencing low energy availability. Now, second to that, we also have to remember that without enough recovery, our body can't really put that fuel to work, so to speak. So, if your athlete is sleeping less than 7 hours a night, she's going to be in a high state of stress. So, that means some of that energy is going to go to other sources, such as her brain, to help it stay alert because she hasn't experienced the amount of sleep that she needs to allow that brain to function optimally. Second to that, we have to look at, I like to call it an epidemic of overscheduling. And that's when we have game practice after game practice, or we have girls that are going from sport practice into a club practice, like really right back to back, and we're not allowing for rest days. Now, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of research demonstrating how much rest days we actually need, but that's because it's really going to be variable to the individual. Bodies are very good at adapting. So if we slowly increase someone's work capacity, she's probably going to only need maybe one rest day a week. Versus if you have an athlete that all of a sudden signs up for every single sport in the world and wants to play it all the time, she's going to be what we call overscheduled, meaning her body does not have time to use that fuel to actually repair all those little micro injuries. So that's where we're going to see her body continue to break down because you have not allowed that time for recovery. So, simply put, when it comes to how do we, what is going to impact these menstrual cycle irregularities, we can't look at body mass size. Instead, we have to look more of the acute situation. So, how much work is this athlete doing? How much is she eating? What is the frequency in which she's eating over time? What does her sleep look like? And what does her schedule look like in terms of what is her rest and how much sport or skill practice is she engaging in per week? We can compare this to her age, or we can really compare this to what she's been doing in prior years, because we only really want to see a 10% increase over the course of months or years in terms of training load. If we have too much of a spike and it's not matched with enough recovery, our athletes are in a state of breakdown, our body's go into recovery or into survival mode, and this is when we see this downregulation of really essential things such as the menstrual cycle.
That was really great and just clarified further what to look out for. What are some of the causes of missed periods? And as you were talking there, I was like, okay, well, you just listed all the causes, and within those are the solutions, which is changing your lifestyle and looking at stress, looking at nutrition. Are you getting enough calories? Are you getting enough protein and carbs for recovery and energy? Sleep. Are you getting quality sleep? And it's just so interesting because now we're going to go off the beaten path a little bit. But one of the solutions that is presented by medical doctors time and time again to solve the problem of missed periods is the birth control pill. And I just want to start off by saying Emily and I are not anti birth control pill. We are informed consent and just making sure people are educated on the risks versus benefits for getting a young teenage girl on this as a solution for regulating her menstrual cycle. Now, I will say that the birth control pill should be used just for what it's designed for, the birth control side of things. But that's another conversation. We're just talking solely about regulating the menstrual cycle. And I've had teenage girls tell me that the moment they get a missed period and they go to their gyno, the first thing the gyno says when she tells him or her that there's a missed period, they say, okay, go on the pill. Nothing about their lifestyle is addressed, and there aren't any other solutions presented. There aren't any risks presented. And it's just so interesting because anything you put into your body will have a risk to it. And people need to be informed, even if
Mhm.
it's a small risk. But my biggest concern is more about telling young girls to go on the pill right away and the effects of the long term use. And we're talking maybe over 8 to 10 years if teenage girls are going on it to regulate their periods before addressing lifestyle habits. So, Emily,
Mhm.
what are your thoughts on this recommendation from doctors? And what are some things that people need to keep in mind when doing the research if the pill is right for them or not for regulating the menstrual cycle?
Mhm. So, one, it's so important to understand that even though doctors are recommending it, they're recommending it because this is what we previously thought would be helpful. This is way back in the 90s. If we actually go back to the history of just any type of estrogen or female hormonal supplements, we find that at first it was designed to help prevent heart disease. And then we saw, oh crap, this is actually going to increase the rate of cancer. Oopsie, let's stop taking estrogen. Okay, what are the different types of hormones that we can give to a female that maybe is going to help her during menopause? So that's actually how taking these hormones first came into what we now know is just it's so prevalent. So back when I said that updated consensus statement, so that's by Mountjoy et al. It was published 2014. The studies occurred during the 2013, but in there, in this consensus statement, it explicitly states doctors need to stop recommending the oral contraceptives to athletes or any female that is experiencing an irregular or missing menstrual cycle because in fact it's really just a bandage over the problem. The problem still exists, but we're just covering it and ignoring it until we get off the oral contraceptive. So kind of taking back to what we talked about, our hormonal cycles. So when we talked about when we don't have enough fuel, that's when we see that all those beautiful cycles of our hormones that are supposed to help ovulation and help allow our bodies get ready for an egg to implant. And if that doesn't happen, that is when the whole lining within our uterus is going to be released. And that's what we experience as a period. So that's what a period really is. Now, when our athletes are experiencing low energy availability, we see that those hormones flatline. Now, when we think, oh, let's take a menstrual cycle to get our period back, if you look at that person's hormonal profile, her hormones stay flatlined because you have now introduced an exogenous hormone. And if you introduce an exogenous hormone, it means our natural endogenous production of hormones remains flatlined. So now we've given our body outside hormones to help us pretend that we're experiencing our period, but in fact, we're not. Because the real issue is that flat line of hormones. We need to get them back to that normal cycling. So, what is the period when you are on an oral contraceptive pill? It's a withdrawal bleed. So, in order to actually get a period, you have to stop taking the pill or you get that blank week. And that blank week means no hormones are in this pill. So, your body says, what the heck is going on? Where's that outside hormone? And so, because that's happening, it's going to release that uterine lining. But that release of the uterine lining is a false perception that things are cycling the way that they should, because instead things are once again flatlined. So taking that oral contraceptive to bring your period back is a really poor misconception of what's going on. Instead, we're giving these young female athletes an exogenous hormone to feel like we're getting our period, but in fact, it's not. Instead, we had previous research that thought, well, if we give these oral contraceptive pills and get their periods back, maybe we can protect their bones. In fact, research over the course of now 20 years have demonstrated one, there's no evidence to suggest that oral contraceptives are going to be protective. In fact, some evidence shows that taking an oral contraceptive can lead to increased injury rates. Now, why? We don't know, but we can postulate that it's because we have bandaged the real issue at play, and that's our body's vital sign is telling us there's a big issue here. Oral contraceptives are absolutely fantastic when you don't want to become pregnant because they help your ovaries stop releasing an egg. Other than that, oral contraceptives should not be used to help bring periods back because no period is brought back. It is a withdrawal bleed. I kind of like to make this comparison. And hey, you're a female athlete. She's experiencing a missing menstrual cycle. You want to give her a period. Okay. What about the male athlete that all of his friends went through puberty and they all had their big growth spur, but he hasn't yet? Are you going to give him testosterone? Probably not. So why should you give your female athlete outside female hormones to help promote something that should naturally be occurring? Because it doesn't actually happen this way. If we're not giving our males testosterone, why are we giving our females either estrogen, progesterone, any type of combination pills? Because there's multiple types of oral contraceptives out there. And their main goal is to stop contraceptives. It is not to help protect your athlete, to help get her period back. It is a facade that makes you feel like your athlete is healthy. And it's just kind of like saying, this vital sign, I'm not even going to consider it anymore. And I'm going to give myself this fake thing that's going to make me feel like my vital sign is working again, when in fact, it's not.
It's so true that it masks everything that's going on. And you listed all of the causes earlier of missed periods. And if she jumps right to the pill and she's like, okay, I'm good now, but her nutrition's still bad. Her sleep is still bad. She's still stressed. And we know all those things increase chance of injury. She still is highly susceptible to injury because she hasn't addressed what's going on in her body internally. So
Mhm.
that's why it's just such a dangerous solution to present first to a young girl. And it's also a mental thing. It's like, look, we don't want to enable girls to look for the quick fix or that quick pill. It is a quick pill, but it's not good long term. And
Mhm.
why don't we just empower our female athletes, empower them with good nutrition, teaching them the importance of the macros and what nutrients they need to perform at their best, teaching them how to take recovery and rest days or organize their schedule so they can manage their stress better, and give them these tools that yes are going to help them for their sport and the health as being athletes, but also for life. I mean, it's just such a great lesson on long-term discipline with the
Mhm.
basics and just being a healthy, vibrant woman. That's what really gets me with this conversation. I'm just like,
Mhm.
if you're just jumping to a quick fix with the pill, you're disempowering her.
Mhm. Absolutely. And I think another important concept to bring up is oral contraceptives are now often prescribed not only for females that are having missing menstrual cycles, but maybe those that are having extremely heavy menstrual cycles or menstrual cycles that are characterized with really extreme cramping. And same thing applies. Yes, taking this oral contraceptive is going to help take those symptoms away, but the cause of those symptoms are never going to be addressed. And we know that heavy menstrual cycle bleeds and extreme cramping can be a result of just macronutrient imbalances, especially within our fatty acids, looking at an omega 3, omega 6 imbalance. So instead of focusing on the cause, we're giving our athletes a magic pill that's going to make them feel like the problem is solved. But here's the issue: when the athlete stops taking the oral contraceptive pill and her hormones go back to her normal dysregulation, she's going to experience those issues again. So now, instead of having a 15-year-old that's experiencing really heavy menstrual cycles, you're going to have a 26-year-old that's trying to have a career that's having really heavy menstrual cycles. And she's a teacher, and she's not going to sure when she can go to the bathroom again. That's a bigger issue here because we've never addressed the cause. And when we give our young athletes oral contraceptives, like I said, it blunts that normal cyclical nature of our hormones. So that means that her body has never found her natural cycle because we know every cycle between women are completely different. We know this. Women that have had babies understand one pregnancy is different than another pregnancy because your hormones are so variable to the state of stress around you as well as to the individual. So if you never give your youth athlete at least 2 years of a natural cycle where it's figuring itself out, and you give her an oral contraceptive and now you've essentially flatlined, when she's in her 20s and she takes off that pill, she's got to go through that puberty all over again. And at 26, when you're having a career, that's not really the time to go for it. You're supposed to go through it at that younger age. So instead of solving the problem, you're just delaying it.
Mm. I just want to repeat one more time, guys. We're not talking about birth control for birth control and not getting pregnant. We're just talking about regulating the menstrual cycle. So stay focused on the topic at hand. I will say, though, there are other alternatives than the pill for birth control that also you need to be informed about and you need to ask your doctor about because there's so many other alternatives that might work best for you. So keep that in mind. And I do want to touch on some other risks to the pill, long-term risks. And there's been studies on increased depression and mood swings. And after a while, sometimes it just stops working and all these symptoms just start to manifest when you've been on it for so long. So do you have anything on that?
So, in regards to just like the experiencing depression and mood swings, it all still comes down to the same thing. It's human physiology. It's all related to the hormones that are cycling within our body. So again, if we're taking an exogenous hormone, we have now blunted our endogenous hormonal production. So that means that hormones that affect not just our menstrual cycle, but our moods, our ability to recover, our ability to fight illnesses are all affected. And if we blunt those hormones for a long time, it's going to take time for that person to get that normal fluctuation back. So that's when a lot of times we see research of, oh, female athlete or female went off the oral contraceptive pill. Now she's experiencing high states of depression, where it's like, well, yeah, because her body is still having to figure itself out because it never was given that opportunity to do so. Because hormones take time to find their natural cycle, because hormonal, whatever my estrogen concentration is, it's going to affect other hormonal concentrations. And all of those are going to affect how, as a human, we live our lives, how happy we feel, how stressed we feel, how much we're going to be able to come back from, whether it be sickness or just a hardship. We are human beings, but we are a result of our physiology. And if we are taking something that impacts our physiology, we have to understand there are going to be effects. And those effects are things that are going to be highly variable among each individual, because being a female is so cool, but all of us are extremely individual when it comes down to our hormonal profile.
I think you broke that down than some medical doctors. Because, the truth is you go in and they just sell you on it right away, and they don't list the risks and the repercussions for your body long term. And one thing I do wanna share, and actually this information is starting to come to the forefront more now. It used to be pretty buried in Google. You couldn't find it, but now more people are talking about it, and it's the long-term impact of the pill and increased risk for cervical cancer in young women. And I mean, you guys can research this yourself. I'm going to include all the links in the caption below so you can take a look, but so many organizations are talking about it. WHO, cancer.org, PubMed, WebMD. You can see it on all these websites, but it says the longer a woman uses oral contraceptives, the greater the increase in her risk of cervical cancer. One study found a 10% increased risk for less than 5 years of use, a 60% increased risk with 5 to 9 years of use, and a doubling of the risk with 10 or more years of use. So, if you have a 14-year-old girl who's going into the doctor, she's getting on the pill right away to regulate her periods, and she's still on it by age 24, 25 after college. Like when is she going to go off of it? So our point is get our young girls to empower themselves first in their adolescent years with good nutrition and sleep and stress management so that you're not gambling with this long-term risk of being on the pill for more than 5 to 9 years. I mean, a 60% increased risk in cervical cancer, that's pretty alarming. That should be a red flag. So be sure to check the links below. And again, we're very pro just do your own research and then make a decision for your daughter and what you think is best for her long-term health.
Absolutely. Yeah, a big thing that I always like to say is like when you are doing your own research, understand how to critically evaluate a research source. How many subjects were there? Who's funding this research? Was it peer reviewed? Have you now seen these results replicated in other research studies? That's where it's frustrating for some people outside of academia because I often hear, well, how do we not know? How do we not know? And it's like, well, we have some poor levels of evidence and we have very few high levels of evidence. So we can't really make drastic conclusions. But what we can say is that we understand the physiological impacts right now of what oral contraceptives do. Long term, we can postulate that this is going to affect different things. Cancer, we know, is extremely multifactorial. So, could this impact? Absolutely. Unfortunately, it takes decades of research for us to actually come down to final conclusions. But, same thing, let's rewind back into the early 1900s into like that 1950s, 1960s, when we started giving a lot of menopausal women estrogen. We kept forcing it on them because this was supposed to be the magic pill or the magic cream that is supposed to help alleviate the hot flashes and alleviate all of the not nice symptoms that come down with, your body's natural down regulation of estrogen production. But it took at least 30 years to look back and realize, uh-oh, we thought this was going to help, the issue with heart disease in women's. And in fact, we've created another issue and now we have extreme rise in cancer. So it takes time, but like you said, we have to be our biggest advocates and we also have to understand what our bodies are naturally before we start adding things to them, especially when we're adolescent. You don't want to have I'm sure that every woman listening to this, I know it myself. You probably didn't understand your body until your 30s, where you're like, oh, wow, oh my goodness, that's what my body feels like during my period. Oh my goodness, you're trying to have a baby. How does this actually work? How many days am I actually fertile? But if you understood that and we were taught this at a younger age, we'd be much more empowered to understand why a menstrual cycle is so imperative and why taking something that's going to give us a false conception of a menstrual cycle really is going to do more harm than good.
I think that those were some great closing words, and I'm going to include all of our resources between Emily and myself. And I'm also going to include a really good Instagram follow called Balanced Bears. So they talk about how to not only just regulate your menstrual cycle, but how to navigate the different phases. How should you be training, recovering? What should you be eating? And they've done some really cool posts on smoothies during the menstrual phase, the ovulatory phase, and just really cool stuff. So I'm going to link their account. They're absolutely super. And Emily, do you have anything else you want to share before we wrap up?
I always like to bring this into discussion because I think it's so important. Now, a couple of years ago, we looked at the US women's national team and we were so excited because they started tracking their menstrual cycle and their coaches were able to adjust how, they trained and the little nuances there. And I like to bring up something that's very imperative. If we have professional female athletes that are experiencing natural menstrual cycles, there is no excuse for your adolescent to not. Your adolescent athlete should be experiencing far less training volume than at the professional level, which is another discussion that we can discuss later of why that may not be true. But we have to remember if we have high level female athletes having regular menstrual cycles, your adolescent athlete experiencing an irregular menstrual cycle is a huge red flag that needs more than a bandage to solve.
I love that. So, guys, I hope you were taking notes during this episode. We were so happy to have Emily back on, and she'll obviously be back on again. So, Emily, thank you so much for such an enlightening discussion, and I will see you guys next week.